It was the 10th of November 1938. It was a day of great sorrow for the Turkish nation. After 15 years of being at the helm of power, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk passed away at the young age of 57. Despite living a short life, Atatürk achieved what perhaps very few have ever achieved. Excelling as an army commander, he became the hero of Gallipoli in 1915. However, his greatest achievement would be the founding a nation state guided by the spirit of progress and modernity. It was this spirit, referred to as Kemalism, which emerged as the ideological backbone of the modern Turkish state. To understand Turkey of today, it is necessary to understand this ideology, which has roots deep into the past. The Republic of Turkey traces its roots to the 19th century. During this period, the Ottoman Empire was reduced to becoming the sick man of Europe. To remedy the decline which was plaguing the Ottoman Empire, many in the empire began to call for reform. This would then lead to the Tanzimat period. In this era, the first major steps towards modernization were initiated. The most consequential of all the reforms was the formation of a modern army modeled on the militaries of Western European states. In addition to technological progress, the era was characterized by the emergence of new ideologies. With the rise of nationalism, the ethno-religious minorities of the empire began to desire independence from Ottoman rule. There were several responses to this major issue. First, many began to call for a proto-civic nationalist ideology called Ottomanism, seeking to establish a common Ottoman national identity that transcended religious and ethnic identities. However, there were others who desired to emphasize the empire's Islamic identity in order to unite the Muslims living inside of the realm and living outside of it. Opposing the ideals of both was a new variant of ethnic nationalism, Pan-Turkism. This ideology seeks to focus on uniting the Turkic peoples inhabiting an area stretching from the Bosphorus to Yakutia. It was the third response which would emerge victorious over the others, as the new government formed in the aftermath of the 1908 Young Turk Revolution held an affinity for Turkic nationalism. However, the government collapsed in the face of the empire's defeat in the Great War, and in the vacuum that followed, the victorious Allied powers seek to divide the remaining territory in the hands of the Ottomans. This encountered fierce resistance, leading to the rise of a national movement under the command of a highly respected general named Mustafa Kemal Pasha. Overcoming all odds, he established control over all of Anatolia and eastern Thrace. However, would this new Turkey be a restored Ottoman state, or did the esteemed general have something else in mind? In his pursuit of building a modern nation-state out of the ruins of the Ottoman Empire, Mustafa Kemal formulated the ideology of Kemalism, which could be summarized into 6 arrows that contain the essence of his ideals. The first arrow of Kemalism represents republicanism, and that is for good reason. Atatürk abolished the Sultanate in 1922, laying the foundations for a unitary parliamentary republic with a relatively powerful president. It should also be remembered that his rule, despite his democratic inclinations, was generally categorized to be authoritarian, suppressing any form of quote-unquote reactionary opposition to his reforms. The second arrow of Kemalism represents nationalism. Atatürk's form of nationalism could be roughly called a synthesis between Ottomanism and Turkic nationalism. Theoretically, Kemalist nationalism was civic nationalist in nature. Therefore, Article 66 of the Turkish constitution states, everyone bound to the Turkish state through the bond of citizenship is a Turk. In this sense, Kemalists advocate for something similar to what the Ottomanists of the late 19th century advocated for. However, Kemalism simultaneously also calls for ethnic nationalism. Although opposed to Pan-Turkism, a greater emphasis was placed on national unity derived from a common Turkish language and Turkish culture. Nonetheless, it should be mentioned that Kemalist nationalism does not consider blood purity to be a requisite to being a Turk, with some of its previous leaders being of mixed descent. For many ethnic minorities, Kemalist nationalism was and is quite confusing. While not explicitly excluded from society, they were also highly encouraged to assimilate into the majority Turkish-speaking population in order to further cement their loyalty to the Turkish state. This synthesis has made it difficult for many to comprehend Kemalist nationalism. Therefore, many mistakenly assume it to be a variant of ethnic nationalism, while many apologists seek to describe it as being purely civic nationalist in nature. In reality, it is neither, while containing elements of both. The third arrow of Kemalism represents populism. Populism in the Kemalist sense largely corresponds to the idea of popular sovereignty. A key pillar of the modern Turkish state's ideology is the motto, "Egemenlik kayıtsız şartsız milletindir," or sovereignty unconditionally belongs to the people. This motto embodies the belief that the Turkish nation is the sole source of legitimacy in the country, while all the other institutions are just the guardians of the said sovereignty. This was a break from the past notions of political legitimacy. Therefore, this motto has been included in all the four Turkish constitutions. The Kemalist state would derive its source of legitimacy from the masses, even if it paradoxically uses authoritarian methods to safeguard the revolution that has given the masses their political power. The fourth arrow represents secularism, perhaps the most controversial facet of the ideology. The Ottoman Empire was a caliphate, meaning it claimed to be the guardian of Islam and Muslims throughout the world. Therefore, it had different legal systems for its majority Muslim population and the other religious minorities, who were referred to as millets. This was opposed by many secularists, reformists of the late 19th century, who seek to secularize the state. After coming to power, Mustafa Kemal Pasha took up the mantle and made secularization one of his primary objectives. In 1924, he abolished the caliphate, while the Turkish constitution was amended to make it more secular in 1928. This was then followed by a series of laws which seek to restrict the role of religion in public life. Sharia law was dismantled, replaced by a secular legal code. Religious organizations such as the dervishes were deemed illegal, while religious symbolism was highly discouraged in public. Contrary to popular belief, the Kemalist state under Atatürk did not ban the veil, a decision which was taken by the military junta of the 1980s. The Quran was translated into Turkish, while the Adhan was to be only given in Turkish. Women were given equal rights to men, with Turkey giving them the right to vote before most European states. Education was secularized, with emphasis being placed on science and rationality. Atatürk's version of secularism closely aligned with French laïcité, which also seek to restrict the role of religion in society. These reforms angered many religious conservatives who condemned Atatürk's government. As a result, there were several rebellions in the southeast, led by Kurdish tribesmen who seek to establish a more Islamist form of government. These rebellions were brutally crushed by the state. This showed the Kemalist state was willing to use highly authoritarian and brutal methods in order to safeguard its revolution. The fifth arrow of Kemalism represents statism. When Mustafa Kemal Pasha came to power in 1923, he inherited a country in ruin. Turkey had an extremely small industrial base and was very dependent on agricultural production. In order to survive in this new world, Turkey had to modernize, that too in a short span of time. Initially, the economy was more laissez-faire in nature. However, as Turkey found itself in an economic crisis in the 1930s, Prime Minister İsmet İnönü and his supporters began to call for increased state intervention. So, statism was not socialist. However, it was a highly interventionist economic policy. Nonetheless, the philosophy of statism was not something central to Kemalism, unlike the other five arrows. Therefore, Atatürk did not show much hesitation when appointing Celal Bayar as Prime Minister in 1937, who introduced liberal economic policies. The sixth arrow represents reformism or revolutionarism. Atatürk's 15 years in power were extremely consequential in Turkish history. It was so consequential that the reforms that took place in that period are referred to as devrimleri or revolutions in Turkish. The principle of revolutionarism basically calls Turkey to continue the progress made under Mustafa Kemal Atatürk and defend it from any seemingly reactionary threat. Effectively, it embodies Kemalism and the actions of the Kemali state as a whole. There was no moving back to the era of the Sultan. The Turkish nation was to have a progressive outlook and reject dogmatic reactionarism. This was Atatürk's project, building a new modern nation state that would catch up to the rest of Europe. But would it survive after him? The death of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk in 1938 was a major turning point in Turkish history. The guardian of the Turkish nation had left the scene. Who would succeed Atatürk as the new protector of Turkish nationalism and Kemalism? While İnönü became the new president, he did not hold the legitimacy that his predecessor possessed. While rightfully credited for avoiding the horrors of the Second World War, his wartime policies led to an economic disaster. He was Atatürk's loyal soldier and prime minister, but he was never able to fill the void left by Mustafa Kemal. The people punished İnönü for his disastrous economic policies by voting the Conservative Democrat Party to power in 1950. In the decades following, the Cumhuriyet Halk Partisi of Atatürk could not recover its previous status as the most dominant party in politics. The party also made a move towards the left of center, assuming its current position of being a left-leaning political party. Kemalism had only one refuge, and that was the Turkish armed forces. Even as conservative political parties came to power, they could not dare to undermine Atatürk's legacy, lest that provoked a coup. The military emerged as the loyal guardians of Atatürk's ideals, overthrowing governments they felt threatened the status quo in 1960, 1971, 1980, and 1997. Nonetheless, in the 2000s, as the Adalet ve Kalkınma Partisi, AKP, rose to power, the military's role in politics has been steadily declining. This coincided with a decline in Kemalism's presence in the political landscape. This has not marked the death of Kemalism as an ideology, however, as it enjoys significant levels of support from the Turkish electorate despite the last 20 years of Erdogan's government. The last 100 years of Turkey's existence has proven one fact: Atatürk and his ideals are central to the modern Turkish state and are unlikely to disappear soon. Thank you for watching the video. If you liked the video, consider liking the video and writing a comment down below. Also, Click on the subscribe button and then on the bell icon if you do not want to miss future videos. If you wish to watch something related to Turkey, you can click on the video on the left, which is about the Turkish War of Independence. But if you wish to watch something else, you can click on the video on the right, which is about Israel's support to Iran during the 1980s. Thank you and goodbye.